Good morning. Christy Hartman here. We're going to print the papers for these 3 gel printed cards. We're going to use a series of backgrounds and masks to produce the entire project. This is a gel plate, which is a proprietary material. This happens to be a gel press. Jelly Arts makes one too. They are both very good. And I don't know if you can tell, but it's very soft and pliable. And when I pull this off of my acrylic plate, you can see that it has a little bit of a wobble and a give to it. I have my 5x7 on a plexiglass backing, and it's just an acrylic stamping block is all it is. You can buy these at Stampendous. I've seen them at Joggles places. I like to have my plate so that I can pick it up and I can place my plate for my printing session. If you like keeping your stationery on the table, go right ahead. I did that for years. We're going to print on a number of different materials. One thing that you can always print on is just plain computer paper. This is just a sheet of computer paper, nothing special. I think it might be a Hammermill brand. I don't really know. Any of them will work. You can also use just plain scrapbooking paper. For example, the back of this print right here was printed on a piece of scrapbooking paper. Scrapbooking paper is usually archival. It's usually acid-free, and so it makes for a great substrate for your printing session. I also like to print on watercolor paper. This is watercolor paper. This is actually Canson. This Canson, one side is fairly smooth, the other side it has some texture to it. I like to print on the smooth side. Here's one that I did on the rougher side. You just get a grainier appearance. One thing I would recommend is when you're working on a new project, begin your project on a piece of just inexpensive paper. Practice on that inexpensive piece of paper until you've got the design down, and then move for the finished piece with your watercolor paper. Another good option is deli wrap. This is just a piece of deli paper. Mine is made by Dixie. It's cabinet wax. Deli paper has 2 sides. It has the smooth kind of waxy side, and then it has the other side which is rougher. I'm actually using an 8x10" gel plate. And I'm going to use a combination of my 4" brayer and my 2" brayer. I'm going to use Deco Art paints to print these. I'm going to start with cad yellow. You can see that I have left a mess on my plate. I personally like to do that because I feel that it adds interest to my prints. I'm going to use my 2" brayer for no other reason than I just like it. I'm going to brayer out cad yellow all over my plate. And I'm not putting this on very thick. It's actually a fairly thin coat. I'm going to use this paper towel off to the side to clean off my brayer with. I'm going to use this Circle Crafters Workshops called Circle Explosion. I'm going to lay that down directly onto my plate. A piece of, this is just scrapbooking paper that I cut down to size. I'm rubbing my fingers over the top of that. And that's what we end up with. I'm going to allow half of this print to dry, and I'm going to use the other half to continue developing this print, which will be the print that I use for my tree. So let's get some olive green, place some olive green out on our plate, and I'm going to just guesstimate approximately where half is, and I'm just going to make a little mark. And I'm going to brayer olive green across, and I want the bigger circles to print. So I'm going to place this down. Notice I'm not putting it over on this, which I'm allowing to dry. And then we're going to use this for a different purpose. So I'm going to take my watercolor paper, place it down over the top of all that green stencil. If I wanted to, I could run my brayer right over the top of this. To see how my paint was adhering. It was doing okay. So there's my next layer on my print for my tree. I'm going to pull this off gently, and then I'm going to set this aside. One last thing that we're going to do to this, and I'm not concerned whether or not this is dry or not. It isn't going to be a problem. I'm going to again leave this alone. I'm going to add some Hauser dark green, which is just a really dark, pretty green. I like this green. I'm going to add some paint to my plate, and again I'm just up to that halfway mark. And I'm going to add a stencil, which is a 5 by 7 inch stencil, and I'm going to place this down over the top of all that green. And this is a stencil that I cut myself, but you can find something very similar to this. I'm going to take this print, and I'm just going to lay it right down over the top of that stencil. And I'm going to rub my fingers, and I'm rubbing pretty firmly across that entire area. Nice. That looks great. Okay, now I want to clean up a little bit more of this. I'm going to take a piece of deli paper, and I'm just going to lay this down right over the top of this and just see if there's any more paint that I can pick up. The amount of paint that you pick up sometimes is determined by your weather, how dry or how moist your weather is. And I didn't get hardly anything. So I'm going to pull this up, and you can see I pulled up some of the yellow onto the stencil. Now it's time to pick these up, and I'm going to use separate pieces of paper, and these are some papers that I cut that are. And over the top of this I'm going to add light buttermilk. This is called a pickup print. I'm going to use my 4-inch brayer this time. Just brayer that paint out over the top of that entire area. I'm going to take my 2 pieces of paper. I'm going to place them side by side on my jelly plate. And this one. And I'm going to put this over the top of it. And I'm going to just use my brayer to kind of smooth it all down. going to check, and I'm going to pull this one first. And that's the subsequent print that you see. We're going to use these for our stars. And let's pull this one up. And this one is just kind of a bonus print. So we're going to print the background paper for our ornament, and you can see how it shows through that background. We're going to do another half and half because we're going to print the paper that we're going to use for our ornaments for our tree. We're going to print the background for our star. You can see how those two work. Alright, so let's get started. Again, as you can see, I started with some yellow. So let's get back out our CAD yellow, and notice how messy my plate is. I'm not going to worry about that. It'll pull up and look just fine. It'll be interesting. Add some CAD yellow again. I'm going to take that same circle explosion, going to place it on my jelly plate. I'm going to grab another piece of watercolor paper. I'm going to lay it down on that. I'm going to rub over the top of it. And then I'm going to take just a regular piece of paper, lay it side by side, and rub over both of these, kind of holding on to both of them. This one is going to be our background for our ornament, is going to begin developing the pattern for our ornaments on our tree. This we're going to let dry for just a few minutes. The next thing we're going to use is a little bit of winter blue. And this is pretty well dry. It's not completely dry, but if I brayer really carefully, I think we'll be fine. So let's get some winter blue out. I don't know if that'll be quite enough. I'm going to take my 4-inch brayer and gently. You don't want to brayer so hard that you lift all of that yellow pattern that you're developing underneath. You want to keep as much of that as you possibly can. I'm going to use this yellow print. I'm going to lay it right over the top of my winter blue. And press that down into my stencil. Hold on to that. And I'm going to lay this piece of paper down and do winter blue on this one as well. Same exact thing we were just doing, but with a different color. Good. Looks great. Looks great. I'm going to pull that off, set it aside. I'm going to let this dry. Next, we're going to use Santa Red. We're going to go over the top of all this. My 4-inch brayer. And I'm brayering pretty gently. using the same exact stencil. And this time I want the bigger dots on this piece, so I put my stencil here. So I'm going to lay this down. I'm going to hold on to that and then place my piece of watercolor paper right next to it. Okay, and there's the piece for the ornament. This will be what I punch my ornaments out for the tree with. I'm going to let this completely dry, and then I'll be back to pull another print. This is completely dry, and this entire thing is going to become our star. So I'm going to use a little peony pink, and I'm going to brayer it out over the top of this. Take one piece of watercolor paper and lay it down right over the top of this, and I'm just going to let it stick. And take another piece of just computer paper and pick up what's left. Right there. I'm going to lay a piece of deli paper over the top of all this. You really want that to adhere. Let's pull this one first. That's a nice pattern. And this one, can come up next, and you can see what was left with all that yummy texture. And I'm going to use that piece of deli paper and try and pick up anything that's left on my gel plate. Not much. So we'll save this for the next time around. So it's time to print the blue area around our pattern. Notice how this is going to work. So here is the pattern that we just printed. Here is our tree. So when we mask this out, and I can decide which way I want my tree to go. This one's going the opposite direction. This one actually obviously is going to go this direction. I place my tree onto my paper, and then I print around the tree. Let me show you how we do that. So we're going to use two different blues. We're going to use, and I'm also using my 5 by 7 inch plate because I want to show you how this works when you have an acrylic block on the back of your plate. So let's start with our winter blue. This is the same color that we used when we did some printing for our ornament and for our star. I'm going to put some paint on there. I'm going to take Williamsburg blue and go from the top down. I'm going to use my 2-inch brayer. Notice it's green. It's not going to hurt anything, it's dry. And I'm going to go about 1/3 of the way up on my plate. I'm going to clean off my brayer. I want my brayer fairly clean. You can still see it has blue, that winter blue on it. I'm just going to take as much as I can possibly get. I'm going to brayer from the top down. And I'm going to overlap those two blues slightly. Clean off my brayer, and I'm going to go back over the top of this. Okay, now if I have an acrylic block on this, all I need to do is lay my paper down like so, with the mask positioned wherever I want it. Lay my paper down flat on my surface, my work surface, with my mask over the top of it. Now if I'm afraid that my mask is going to move, I can take a piece of tape, just a piece of masking tape, loop it over, position it on the back of my mask, and I can tape it down. I think I'm going to go this direction instead. Okay, so I tape that down. Lighter blue will go on the bottom, my darker blue on top. I turn this over, position it wherever I want my blues to be positioned, lay it down, press onto it. I'm not pressing very hard. I'm going to pull this over. Use my brayer to roll over the top of my watercolor paper. Now, I'm going to flip this over so you can see. And you can see where the tree is going to be. I'm going to test it. See if it's lifting. It's not quite lifting yet. So I'm going to let this sit for just a minute or two and let it adhere. And I'm going to pull it up. And there I have my tree. Had a little spot right over here that didn't print, this area right here. That doesn't bother me. It's not a problem. I'm pretty happy with it. Take the masking tape off of my mask, and I can pull this up. And here's my tree. I can reuse this, or I could put this tree onto something. Alright, so let's print our ornament. We're going to use this piece. Remember, this is watercolor paper. We're going to use this piece. Here's my mask. Same exact thing that we just did. I can decide how do I want my ornament to be positioned. Could turn it the other direction too. I think I'll go like this. Put it on the back. Position my ornament. I think I want it just like that. Okay, now we're going to use olive green. Using our 2-inch brayer. Lay that down. Position my jelly plate. Press it down. Pull it over. Adhere it to the plate. I'm pretty sure you can see how it's going to look through that acrylic block. And this is the ornament. Here's the big reveal. And there we have it. I'm going to let this dry. Throw away my masking tape. Pull this up. Save my green mask for another time. And we're going to print our star. And here's our paper for our star. Here's my mask for my star. So I can decide how I want my star positioned. Grab a piece of masking tape. Press it down. Get this out of the way. Okay, I'm going to lay this down. And this time we're going to use a different blue. Position this onto my paper. press it down, turn it over, adhere that paper to my plate. Yep, that one's ready to go. And there we have our star. Set that aside, let them dry. I thought it might be interesting to, so far I've shown you how to do your background on a 5x7. I wanted to show you on an 8x10 because some of you I know are using an 8x10. So same thing, we're going to use winter blue and Williamsburg blue. I just am going to use the 8x10. I also have already adhered my mask, which you can see this is the mask that I used before. I've already put it on with masking tape, but I'm using this background, which was the alternate background that we did earlier. So let's just brayer out our paint. Winter blue, a third of the way up from the bottom. This is a pretty big space, so I'm using a fair amount of paint. Now the other thing I haven't shown you yet is what happens if you get too much paint on your plate, which I have too much right here. So just take it on your brayer, remove it on a paper towel, remove it on a paper towel, and then brayer over it again, and that'll remove even more paint, and brayer it off onto your paper towel. That's just an easy way to remove paint. Gently go back over your winter blue. That should be good. Brayer your paint off on your paper towel. Now, I have my block, or excuse me, I have my gel plate on an acrylic block, and you can see that. This side has obviously it's been stained. You can see that. I'm not going to turn my plate over. Instead, I'm just going to take my piece of paper and lay it down flat on my gel plate, positioning it as the best I can. Then I'm going to take another piece of paper. I'm going to use deli paper. You could use computer paper. I'm going to lay it over the top of all of that. You might say, why do I brayer over the top of this? For me, it's just another way of getting your paper to adhere to your gel plate. Let's pull this off. Pulled off the blue. Have kind of a cool thing there. You can see you've got some interesting color. Set that off to the side. Now I'm going to rub over the top of this paper. This is printed on computer paper, and sometimes your computer paper wrinkles your paper a little bit. Test it first before you pull. See if it's adhering. It's not. So I'm going to let it sit for just a few minutes and let it dry. What to do if you don't have these acrylic blocks? All you do is just position your gel plate on your table and you just let it sit. And everything has to be done over the top just like I did right here. And it works actually just fine. I did this for years before I ended up investing in the acrylic blocks. So that's up to you. Some people use other things because they like the idea of being able to flip the gel plate over the top, but they don't want to buy the acrylic block. So some people use their piece of mylar that comes with your gel plate. I don't like to do this because to me this is just way too wiggly, and sometimes because my piece of mylar is really old, if you have a newer gel plate than what this one is, then your piece of Mylar will be stickier. Mine is so full of paint that there's no way my gel plate would ever stick to this. Another option would be to take a piece of plastic or to use this clamshell. And you could do that. You'd have to be careful though, because you don't want to break your clamshell, because this is what you store your gel plate in. Or another piece of plastic that you might have at home. I'm going to work now. So let's pull it up. Oh yeah, that looks nice. Pull off my piece of masking tape gently. Be careful with masking tape too, by the way. Some masking tapes are really sticky. And you have another print that you can use. And you can see down here at the bottom, I didn't get my print, or my paint didn't adhere to my paper. I could actually just paint right over the top of that. It wouldn't be a problem. All right, so I've shown you another option here. Let me pull this up again. And obviously I had used this mask before, so just let this dry and you'll be able to use it again easily, or like we talked before, use this for something else. I wanted to show you another option if you don't have a stencil that you're happy with for the tree. Choice is to use pieces of yarn. And to brayer your dark green out onto your plate, and take these pieces of yarn, they're just short pieces, and lay them over the top in just any old fashion, overlapping them. Take your piece of paper and position it over the top of all of that, and brayer over the top of it. And then press. Now just peek at what's happening. Oh yeah, that looks pretty good. Pull it up and you have another option for your tree. Pull all this off. I'm going to grab a piece of deli paper and pick that up. Look at that. See how it left all the pattern from the yarn? We are going to add some detail to our tree. We're going to shade under the top two layers of our tree, and then the third layer we're going to add the trunk. So let's start with the same color green that I used for my dark, which is Hauser Dark Green. And I'm just going to float in a shadow. And I'm just going to bring that shadow down just a bit. Okay, let's do the next layer in your tree. And I'm going to bring that shadow down just a tad. Okay, I'm going to do that shadow one more time. Okay, that's pretty good. And we're going to use a little of asphaltum to do our tree trunk. It's going to float in some color underneath the trunk. Down along the side. Kind of defines the tree trunk as well. And I'm going to do that a second time. Okay, perfect. We're going to use a little bit of Snow White, and we're going to put a highlight of Snow White down at the base of each one of our layers of our tree. And then we're going to go over that with a little bit of Neon Scorching Yellow. Just right along the bottom. All this is really doing is just kind of lightening up all of those layers, especially if I have some dark, like right there. This will actually differentiate the three different layers and make the shadow a little bit darker. And one more. And I'm going to go over those one more time. And I'm going to pull that highlight kind of up the top part of my layer. And the last one. Okay, now we're going to take the neon scorching yellow and I can bring it up a little bit into the tree. Anywhere where there would be a lighter area. And I'm going to make this area a little bit lighter too. All right. There's our tree. And I'm going to use, for the next step, I'm going to use this. It's a Princeton Select Lunar Blender. This is a 1/4 inch. 3/8 would work too. I'm just going to take some of that neon scorching yellow and just these areas that are a little lighter, I just want to put a little bit more, and I'm just kind of brushing it over. Just kind of highlighting some of the areas of the tree, defining the shape a little bit. I'm going to use this same brush cleaned it out, of course, and I'm going to load this brush. This is kind of a filbert shape. I'm going to load that brush just with some white, about like that. And I'm going to begin, and I'm just going to tap. And I'm not even outlining, I'm just kind of tapping snow onto my tree in areas where maybe there would be a little bit more snow. And when I need more paint, I'm going to reload. And I'm not only am I tapping it flat like this, I'm kind of tapping it on the chisel edge just to get snow in other areas. So I'm going to turn this around and I'm going to tap that in. And there also will be a little bit of snow right down here on my tree trunk on either side where these are kind of wider. And there probably would be a little bit down here. Just a little bit. The last thing we're going to do is right along the bottom here, just holding my paintbrush kind of on the chisel edge, but not quite. I'm just going to add bits of snow back and forth. Okay. It's time to add our ornaments and our star. The ornaments are going to be out of this paper that we printed earlier. And we're going to use 2 punches. We're going to use this circle confetti, I think it's called, and then this star punch. These are both EK Success punches. I've had them both for a really long time. I don't think you can get this one anymore, but I will give you the line art to be able to draw your own and cut it out. This one, however, they do make. You can either cut your ornaments out yourself, or you can punch them, whichever you prefer. I am going to punch these. So I'm going to position my punch, and I'm going to punch it once, and then I probably will need to punch it a second time, but we're going to start with this. For the star, we're going to use this paper that we printed. I'm going to position my star wherever I think I want it. That should be good. And I'm going to punch it. And you can see this was printed on the back of a piece of scrapbooking paper. And to do this, I don't use the biggest of the confetti punches. I just save this. So I have my punches punched. You can see on this one that I arranged my ornaments like approximately about like this. And I can either go with that or I could change out some of them. I don't really like this one. So I think I'm going to go with this one instead. And I'll just arrange these two like so. And I'm going to use a glue stick, and then I'm going to go over the top of it because I have found that a glue stick doesn't hold these long enough for me. But I like the glue stick to at least position them. And one thing I want to mention, and you don't have to do this, certainly do not have to do this, I just do. I add my darker side for my ornaments on the left. And my darker side is that red area. And basically all the glue stick is allowing me to position my ornament. And I don't know if you noticed or not, but this background is actually a different color than the background I started with. And part of that was on purpose and part of it was out of necessity because I had used my original piece as a sample. This background color is a little bit different. This is actually white, and then this is baby blue. And we used the baby blue when we printed the star. So I just wanted to let you see what this tree looks like if you use a slightly different color. I'm going to use a little bit of decoupage, and this is a DecoArt decoupage product, which is my personal favorite. And I'm just going to slide some decoupage underneath and go over the tops of these. And wherever the glue stick isn't holding decoupage to it. And I kind of go around the outside edge a little bit. You don't remove the decoupage from the piece, but you do kind of remove it from around the outside edge. I just don't think it needs all that. We are ready to do some shading. We're going to use a little Napa red, and I'm using a 1/4 inch angle brush. Definitely use whatever you like to use for shading. I'm going to begin with a star, and I'm just going to give it a light shadow in those areas that I want shaded. Pretty simple. Same thing with the ornaments. And I'm just going around that left-hand side. I'm also going to add a shadow again with that dark green that I used to shade the tree with. And I'm going to put a little bit of a shadow underneath each one of these ornaments and the star. And I don't need to go all the way around it because it's not going to cast a shadow all the way around. Okay, pretty good. Let's go out a little bit so you can actually see it. Now I need to add a highlight, and I'm going to use that neon again. And wherever there should be a highlight on the star, I'm going to add one. I'm going to use a white Posca pen. You could also use a gel pen. Here's a gel pen that you could use. Add a white highlight onto the star, my ornaments. I put both of these side by side so you could actually see them. We're going to splatter real quick. I like to use a round brush to splatter with, and I've got some white on my palette. I get this pretty soupy. Take another brush. You use whatever type of splatter method you like. This is just the one I prefer. And we're going to splatter right over the top of our tree. Put as much snow as you want. On your trees and let them dry. We need to shade our star, and we're going to shade in the shaded areas. I'm not sure you can see that, but I've added with my white chalk pencil some of my lines so that I can start shading my star. And if you look on this one, you'll see that this edge is darker. Both of those two edges are just a little bit darker. This edge, and then we'll highlight. So let's get started. Napa red, same thing we used earlier when we shaded our ornaments. We're going to take a little white, whatever type brush you like to personally use for dry brushing. And for those of you that don't know what dry brushing is, I'll do a quick demonstration. Load your brush, and I'm just using white, titanium white, and then take a paper towel. Take most of that paint off your brush on a dry paper towel. And then, because it's called dry brushing, your brush has to be dry, which kind of makes some sense, but not everyone, I'm sure, knows that. And then start brushing your brush over those areas that you want to highlight. Don't quite have enough paint off of my brush. And I'm just kind of, if I get too much paint in an area, I'm just using my fingers and just blending across the top of it. This area needs to be highlighted. And then this will come down just a little bit more down into here. Just a little lighter. Okay, so we've got that all light. I'm going to use a little of this neon scorching yellow. I'm going to load my brush. I just load into the corner of my angle brush, blend it back and forth. And I've got quite a bit of water in my brush, so it's a fairly thin load of paint. And I'm just going to blend some of that neon paint into those highlighted areas. I'm not going to fill the entire area with that neon paint, but I am going to fill some of it, just to where I'm happy with it. And I want this a little lighter down in this area. Notice how I use the heel of my brush. This is called the heel of my brush. And I kind of use that to blend my paint. Okay. I'm pretty good with that. Let's move on. While that dries, let's do some shading on our ornament. We're going to use Napa Red here and the Neon Scorching Yellow here. So I'll just let you watch, and I'm going to do some shading. pretty good. We're going to let that dry. While that dries, we're going to do the cap of our ornament. We're going to use a blue called Winter Blue. It's the same blue that we used earlier. We used it for part of this background. Okay, that needs a second coat. I'll dry this and I'll be right back. This is just a gold. It's a metallic gold. It's the Deco Art Fluid Metallic Gold. And I'm going to do a little dry brushing on this highlighted side. You can see that there's some here and there's some here. Remove some of that paint. I don't want to remove a lot of it, so I actually want this to show up. And this is a curved surface, so we need to curve our line as we go around. I need a little bit more paint. And we're going to do the same thing right over here. Okay, just like that. I'm going to use the same brush. I'm going to tap into a little bit of titanium white. Just going to pounce some of that off. Take some of it off of my brush. I now have a lighter gold, and I'm just going to go back lightly, go back over the top of this. Just kind of blends it in. And gives a little bit more of a highlight. Tap back into the Snow White, take some of it off of my brush. We're going to use a little bit of this Williamsburg blue to shade the cap. Okay, I'm going to let that dry, and I'm going to come back in with the second coat. And I think that's going to need a third coat. So I'm going to let it dry, come back in with a third coat. top of this I'm going to take a little titanium white, right up the side and over. Blend it out just a bit. Perfect. Need that to dry. While that's drying, I'm going to go back to my star, and I can see I need a little bit more neon. There we go, that's better. I don't know if you can see that, but it's definitely brighter. Let that dry. We can come back to this one, and we're going to add a little bit of that metallic gold right to the top of this. I'm just using like a little teeny tiny round brush. Just like so. I'm going to add some white with my white Posca pen. You can use a gel pen if you prefer. You could also use a liner brush and just line this. Take our black Sharpie marker and let's do a little outlining on this. Now, I wanted this to have some movement, so I purposely lined it with kind of a squiggly line. That way, you don't have to feel like if you have a little bit of it, if you're a little shaky lining, or you make a little bobble like I did just right there, it's not going to matter. And then I'm also going to go around it a little bit, and this is even wigglier, because again we're giving it movement. And you don't have to go all the way around. On this one you can see I did, but on this one I'm not going to. Just gives it a little bit of movement. Makes it look like it's shimmering a little bit. So this one we need to line as well. I don't want this one to look perfect. In fact, definitely going to use wiggly lines on it. And I kind of stop and start where I need to. Then then we're going to go around the outside of it. And again, I'm not going to go all the way around it. Just a few locations. I need a hanger. And then we need some stars. So let's grab our punch. And I will save this paper to use another time. So on this one, I want to have 3 stars. And I think I want one here. I have this white spot right here, and I don't really like that, so I'm going to cover that. And I'm going to put one here. And then I want one down here, just like that. This time I'm going to use my handy dandy phone book. Let that sit for a second. Back to using my finger, obviously. And I want this one to turn this way. And then this one. Okay, I'm going to let those sit and dry. I'm going to add stars to my star. I want one up here. Here. Put one just like that. I think I want one down here. I've got to be mindful of where I'm going to have the edges of my card too. That's another thing, another big deal. Okay, start with this one. Some decoupage and make sure these stars are all going to stay put. We need to do a little bit of finish up work to our last 2 cards. And I took my Posca pen and I just dotted around my star shape after I had used those wiggly lines to outline with my black Sharpie marker. So I wanted to do a quick demonstration of how to do this, and it's actually very, very random. There's no rhyme or reason to it. It's just wherever I think I might need a little bit of a highlight. Sometimes I take it out a little further. And do the same thing to this one. Once you splatter these, you don't notice this quite as much, but it adds kind of a fun little detail. And if I wanted to, I could take some dots down and around. And I could use a bigger Posca pen and do the same thing. So that's adding the dots, that's adding the wiggly line to the stars. Let's splatter these. This one has not been splattered, this one has a little bit of splatter on it. If you notice this, you can see that I used that darker Hauser green on the bottom and I use the light green on top. That would be another option for you. Again, we're going to use a larger round brush. I don't know what size this is. This is a 10. I'm going to take my palette and I am going to thin that paint down quite a bit, and then I like to work it through my bristles a little bit. And then I always test it first. So I could test it over here on my, and that'll let me know if I have enough water. I don't. So I'm going to add a little bit more water to it. That's better. Okay. So then let's splatter this guy. Okay. Always let your splattered pieces dry. Thank you for joining me. Hope you enjoyed this project, and maybe I'll see you the next time. See you later.